She looked him in the eye across the ruined bridge, tagged him in her scanner as Class 4 biotic maintenance drone, and left him for dead in the wreckage of the ship he had bled to defend. He was only a hull maintenance tech, 41 years old, wide through the shoulders, standing in a patched suit on a cargo hauler at the far edge of the outer belt, with 36 elite Thesavoy boarders closing on his position. Nobody on either side thought much of him. His own convoy had listed him as ancillary. The alien had listed him as furniture. But when the Harmonics warden came back 6 months later to walk the corpse of what had once been her flagship, she did not find a grave. She found a mountain of Thesavoy bodies stacked to the ceiling of the relay bay, a splintered fire axe planted in the deck like a signal marker, and one human being who had simply refused to die on the schedule the Empire had set for him. The air in the void gap of Convoy Aurelius 9 tasted of copper, burned ozone, and cheap coolant that had cooked too long against a hot pipe. Lou Ferris ran his tongue along the inside of his cheek to keep his mouth wet and counted 3 heartbeats against the outer skin of the hauler, 6 hours before the flagship image reached colonial authority, 6 hours before anything the Thesavoy were about to do would matter. He was on his back in a crawl space the width of a coffin, the outer plating of the hauler above him, the inner plating below, and between them a slab of unconditioned vacuum that hummed with the sub-audible whine of a hull under thermal load. 2 other crew were pressed against the plating with him, breathing shallow because he had told them to. Sable Vance, the convoy's navigation officer, had smiled at him at breakfast and asked how his sister was doing. Sable Vance was the reason they were hiding. The first sign had come 3 hours out from the last relay handoff. His diagnostic slate had shown a phase drift on the portside coolant loop that no coolant leak could explain. It was the exact drift pattern of a system carrying a passive listening rider, the kind a nation-state used to trace a signal without emitting one. Lou was the hull maintenance tech. Lou was the only one who ever read the phase drift logs, because Lou was the only one whose paycheck depended on knowing when a pipe was about to burst. He had walked to the nav bay to ask about it, and had heard, through the half-closed door, Sable Vance's voice on a channel that was not any convoy channel, saying, in the calm tone of a woman placing a dinner order, "The manifest is clean. The warden's people can move on us at the mark. All systems will be in maintenance handoff. The belt goes silent in 4 hours." Lou did not go in. Lou did not confront her. Lou went to the mess and found Chief Steward Marisol Cade cleaning a coffee pot and asked her very quietly if she trusted him. He then found Junior Engineer Piotr Alazar and asked him the same question. He asked neither of them to believe him. He asked them only to be somewhere else during their next shift, and to trust that the somewhere else he was about to show them was better than the somewhere else Sable Vance was arranging. He walked them, without saying why, to the void gap access panel between the 3rd and 4th hold. He unbolted it with a tool that could only have belonged to a man who had spent 12 years on Ganymede ore platforms in 1.4 gravity, learning to reseat plating with his hands numb from cold. He told them to lie down flat, breathe through their noses, and not to move if they heard voices. Then he closed the panel and left them, because he still had work to do outside. 28 minutes later, the boarders came. They came without warning, because the jamming lattice the Thesavoy had spent 4 months weaving across the outer belt's relay grid had already folded every quantum band distress call back on itself. The convoy's ping went out and hit its own tail. The convoy's captain screamed into the comms for a full 3 seconds before he understood no one could hear him. Nobody was going to hear anything from the belt for a very long time. The Thesavoy came through the primary airlock in a wedge of 6, then 12, then 21, 6-limbed and ridge-plated, plasma sidearms burning the pale violet of a discharge tuned for organic tissue. Their ridge plates cycled with the workmanlike beige of a species performing a scheduled maintenance task. To them, that was what this was. A quiet, contracted job. a route bought and paid for by someone with the authority to buy silence in bulk. 31 of 34 crew died in the first 11 minutes. Captain Yane Trelevan died in the corridor outside his own quarters, trying to reach a manual override that no longer worked because Sable Vance had cut the wire behind the panel earlier that morning. First Officer Delia Manning died in the mess with a coffee cup still in her hand. The convoy's medic, a soft-spoken man named Corentin Bell, died trying to drag a wounded stevedore into the infirmary and got him 3 feet inside the door before a plasma round took them both. The junior stevedore, an 18-year-old girl named Naima Duarte, died crawling toward the airlock she had helped patch the week before, and her last thought was that she had been going to call her mother that evening. Sable Vance walked through the killing floor with the calm of a woman inspecting her own kitchen. She stepped over Delia Manning, whom she had known for 4 years, and did not look down. She met the boarding officer at the door to the bridge, and in careful trade common, said the phrase that had been the code phrase for 6 weeks. The manifest is clean. The warden herself did not board yet. That was beneath her. Her name in her own language was a sequence of quick percussive clicks that meant, when the fleet translator flattened it, Veth. She stayed on the flagship, cycling her ridge plates a bored pale blue, monitoring the operation on a screen the size of a wall. She saw 31 biotic signals go dark. She saw 3 vanish. She counted the vanish as 3 off the manifest for a reason she did not investigate, because the manifest, according to the source who had sold the route, was clean. She was wrong about a great many things that morning, but the specific thing she was wrong about was Lou Ferris. Lou had watched, through the pinhole camera he had installed in the void gap access panel, the same afternoon he had heard Sable Vance on the wrong channel, as 31 people he had eaten breakfast with were shot in the back of the head one at a time. His face did not change, his breathing did not change, he did not make a sound. He noted, in the flat internal voice of a man who had spent his life looking at gauges, that the boarding party came in through the primary airlock in wedges of 6, and that the wedges were sloppy on the second turn because they were used to boarding ships that did not push back. He noted that the plasma sidearms cycled at intervals of 1.6 seconds, which was faster than the salvage report he had read 3 years earlier on a long transit had suggested. He noted that the 6th limb, the one that carried the actuator for the ridge plate shield emitter, tucked under the abdomen when the trooper turned to the right. He noted that this exposed the joint seam near the actuator for exactly the half second it took the trooper to complete the turn. He noted that a projectile could go through that seam if the projectile were kinetic, because the shield was not. He noted also that the last of the 31 crew took a very long time to die, and that Sable Vance stood over him and watched. Lou closed the pinhole feed. He lay in the dark. He breathed shallow. Then he did something no one on the Thesavoy flagship, no one on the Colonial Shipping Authority board, and no one in the entire jamming lattice above the outer belt had accounted for. He reached into the pocket of his patched EVA suit and took out a small brass and steel device the size of a coffee tin. It had a folded hand crank welded to the side. Its housing was pitted where saltwater had eaten it 30 years earlier. It had belonged to his father, who had used it on a fishing trawler in the Bering Sea to call the Coast Guard through winter storms in the days before quantum relays existed. His father had given it to him the day Lou signed his first ore contract on Ganymede, and had said, in the clipped and unromantic voice of a man who did not know how to say the other thing, that if a boy was going out to a place where he could not be heard, he ought to at least have something to shout with. Lou had carried it in his kit for 23 years. He had never used it. Junior engineers on 3 different ships had laughed at him for keeping it. He had smiled at them and put it back in his kit. Now, in the coffin width of the void gap, on his back, with 31 of his crewmates cooling on the deck above him and 36 aliens moving through the corridors, Lou unfolded the crank and began to turn it. The device generated a low, unglamorous analog signal At a frequency, the HFY jamming lattice had been calibrated against every commercial and military band in use since the 22nd century. The Bering Sea trawler frequency was not in that calibration. No one had used it commercially for 80 years. No one had used it at all for 40. The lattice folded 1,000 modern signals back on themselves and let the old one pass like a mouse under a door. Lou cranked for 4 minutes without stopping. He did not know that the signal was reaching a colonial authority listening post on the far side of the belt. He did not know that a junior comms officer at that post was, at that very moment, staring at a spike on a channel her console did not officially monitor, trying to remember what she had read in a training document about legacy analog bands. He did not know that she was going to call her supervisor, that her supervisor was going to call a fleet coordinator, and that the fleet coordinator was going to look at the signal's origin coordinates, see the Aurelius 9 designation embedded in the beacon's serial plate, and understand within 30 seconds that the entire jamming lattice above the outer belt was suddenly, unexpectedly, not as complete as the HFY had been promised. Lou did not know any of that. Lou only knew that his father had once told him, in a boat that smelled of diesel and fish blood, that a man who wanted to be found had to be willing to make noise for a very long time with a very small tool. He cranked. Above him, on the deck of a ship full of the dead, the warden's champion turned the corner of the third hold and paused, because his ridge plate sensor had just registered a faint electromagnetic hum at a frequency his equipment did not have a filter for. The champion, whose name in his own language was a soft double-click his own kind, rendered as Osuran, was six-limbed, ridge-plated, and considered by the warden's court to be the finest hand-to-hand combatant among the flagship's personal guard. He carried a plasma pike and a chest of ceremonial scars. He had killed 47 boarding actions worth of resistance in his career and had never, not once, been surprised. O'Duran stepped over the corpse of Delia Manning and moved toward the access panel, where the faint hum was strongest. He did not lower his weapon. He did lower his professional interest. His posture said that a maintenance hum was a maintenance hum, and that whatever had made it was going to be dispatched, at most, with one shot from a plasma pike at low setting. The panel opened outward from the inside faster than Osuran had ever seen a maintenance panel move. The fire axe that came out of it was a 12-pound tungsten-edged tool rated for cutting through hull composite in an emergency vent breach. It was, in ordinary use, one of the most boring objects on any working ship in the outer system. It was, in this specific use, swung by a 41-year-old man who had spent 12 years at 1.4 gravity in 80-pound suits, swinging heavier tools than this one at material harder than a HFY joint seam. The axe hit the exposed articulation at the base of Osuran's sixth limb, sheared through the actuator housing in one stroke, and stopped somewhere in the region of the champion's central thoracic ganglion. Osuran, who had never been surprised in his career, was surprised. He was also, within about 4 seconds, dead. Lou pulled the axe out with the same economy of motion he used to reseat a coolant valve. He wiped the head on Osuran's shoulder plate. He listened for the 2 other footfalls he had heard behind Osuran's, and he moved, low and fast, into the corridor. The 2 troopers behind Osuran had time to register the axe, the man, and the champion on the floor, in that order. They did not have time to fire. Lou put the axe through the joint seam of the first one's shield actuator, then through the second one's throat plate, where the ridge overlapped the neck bristle. He did it in one continuous motion. The second trooper fell forward, and Lou caught him by the pauldron and eased him down without letting the plasma pike clatter. He crouched over the bodies. He took the 2 plasma sidearms. He took a small tool from Osuran's belt, whose function he did not yet understand, but whose weight suggested it was some kind of encryption key. He took Osuran's translator strip. Then he did the thing that would eventually cause the warden Veth to spend 6 hours cataloguing what a Class 4 biotic maintenance drone could do when it decided it was not done. He walked, carrying a fire axe and 2 plasma sidearms and the head of a HFY champion's honor guard in the tool pouch on his hip, toward the primary lift core of Convoy Aurelius 9. Sable Vance was in the nav bay counting her own money. Lou intended to speak with her first. 2 decks above, the warden's second-in-command, a coordinator whose name the fleet translator rendered as Praxil, watched Osuran's biosignal go flat on his tactical display and frowned. He frowned harder when the 2 troopers behind Osuran also went flat. He frowned hardest when the 3 biosignals following those 3 went flat within 30 seconds of the first, in a linear progression that suggested a single moving cause. He called the flagship. He informed the warden, in the careful tone of a man who had rehearsed his career-ending sentences all his life and never expected to deliver one, that there was, perhaps, an unaccounted-for factor on the target vessel. The warden, on the bridge of her flagship, cycled her ridge plates the pale rose of mild professional amusement. She said the boarding officer was to identify the unaccounted-for factor within 10 minutes or come home in a bag. She turned back to the ledger of contracted receivables she'd been reviewing with the accountant of the HFY commercial extraction arm. She did not think about the maintenance drone she had catalogued as furniture. There was no reason to. Lou Ferris walked into the nav bay of Aurelius 9 with the fire axe on his shoulder and the 2 plasma sidearms tucked into his belt, and looked at Sable Vance across a console she was not going to leave. Sable was 38 years old, dark-haired, competent at her job in the ordinary sense, and had sold the convoy's route to a HFY intermediary for a payment she believed would clear a debt her adult son had incurred with a lender who had a habit of collecting from family. That was the reason she thought she had done it. She was going to learn over the next 14 minutes that this was not the actual reason. She was going to learn that she had been steered from further up, but she did not know that yet, and neither did Lou. Sable looked at Lou. She looked at the axe. She looked at the bodies in the corridor visible through the open door behind him. She looked at Lou again. She said, in a voice that was almost steady, "I didn't think it would be you." Lou said, "I know." She said, "You were ancillary." He said, "Yeah." She said, "How did you know?" He said, "Phase drift on the port coolant loop. You didn't clean up the rider install." She said, "Nobody reads those logs." He said, "I do." She started to reach for the sidearm in her jacket. Lou did not move fast. He simply stepped forward, put his boot on her hand where it lay on the console, and let his weight settle at 1.4 gravity in memory, even though the ship was pulling standard. Sable made a small sound that was not quite a scream. Lou removed the sidearm from her jacket, ejected the charge cell into his palm, and dropped the cell into a coolant drain slot on the console, where it would be irretrievable without cutting the wall open. He said, "Who told you to sell the route?" She said, "A man." He said, "A name." She said, "I don't know his name. He knew my son's name." He said, "You do know the name. You just don't want to say it because you think saying it will kill you." She said, "Saying it will kill me." He said, "Not saying it will kill you slower. I'm going to sit here until you decide which one you prefer." Sable Vance sat on the floor of the nav bay with her hand under Lou's boot and her career and her family and her life in ruins around her, and she said the name. The name was Councilman Renard Vale of the Colonial Shipping Authority's Oversight Board, and Sable Vance told Lou in a shaking voice that Councilman Vale had wanted the Outer Belt's distress grid to go dark for 1 week, and 1 week only, because Councilman Vale had a contract of his own to conclude in that week involving a fleet of vessels the Colonial Authority did not officially know existed. She said she did not know what those vessels carried, She said she suspected they carried the makings of a war councilman veil intended to arrange between the colonial authority and a neighboring polity, on the assumption that the war would benefit certain of his private investments in ordnance manufacture. She said she was sorry. Lou looked at her a long moment. He did not say he forgave her because he did not. He did not say he was going to kill her because he was not. He simply took his boot off her hand, took the second plasma sidearm from his belt, ejected its charge cell as well, and dropped both of the useless weapons in her lap. He said, "You stay here. You don't move. If you're still alive when this is over, you're going to tell the colonial authority everything you just told me, and you're going to do it under oath. And you're going to hope that telling it makes the difference between the 20 years you get for treason and the 25 you get for treason plus obstruction. Do you understand me?" She nodded. She was crying now, in the small, silent way of a woman whose entire self-image had just been dismantled in front of her. Lou did not comfort her. He walked out of the nav bay and closed the door. In the corridor he stood a moment and let his hands shake. He had not eaten in 9 hours. His left forearm ached where a scar he had earned in a hull breach on a Ganymede run 7 years ago was pulling because he had swung the axe too hard on the first strike. He put his palm flat against the corridor wall and felt the hum of the hauler's failing power grid through his glove. He allowed himself, for the space of one breath, to think about his sister Iris on Ganymede. Iris was 34. Iris had a broken atmospheric scrubber in her habitat and a debt she had not been able to pay off since her contract had ended. And Lou had been sending her his hazard bonuses for 2 years running to keep her lungs from starting to bleed the way their mothers had. Iris was going to be waiting for a transfer at the end of this run. If Lou did not come home, Iris would not get the transfer, and the scrubber would not get fixed, and the debt would not get paid, and the lender would move on the last thing Iris had, which was the habitat itself. Lou did not have time to think about Iris in detail. He put the thought where he kept the others, in the pocket at the back of his head, labeled after, and he took the axe off his shoulder, and he went to work. 2 decks up, on the HFY flagship, Coordinator Praxil watched 15 more of his biosignals go flat and understood, with the specific coldness of a man watching his career and his species' operational assumptions collapse in the same minute, that whatever was moving through Aurelius 9 was not a boarding response problem. It was a category error. He escalated. The Warden Veth cycled her ridge plates the pale silver of restrained curiosity, and for the first time actually pulled the crew manifest of Convoy Aurelius 9 to see who her boarders were being killed by. The manifest was clean. The manifest was the manifest Sable Vance had provided. It listed 34 biotic entries. 31 of them were now flat. One of the remaining 3 was inside a nav bay, with no vitals listed because the medical monitor had been ripped out of her chair 3 months earlier and never replaced. The other 2 remaining entries were listed as ancillary hull services, names Ferris L, and in a small parenthetical Cade M and Alazar P, who had been shifted onto ancillary hull services for pay reasons the previous week. The warden looked at those names a long moment. She said aloud to the empty bridge, "There are 3, not 1. She sent a subordinate to pull the maintenance drone's full record from the Colonial Authority personnel database, because although the manifest was clean, the personnel database was not on the manifest. It was a public record. The Thesavoy had access. They had simply never had reason to look. The subordinate came back with a file that Veth read 3 times before she believed it. Louis Allen Ferris, age 41, Colonial Authority citizen, 12 years documented service on Ganymede ore platforms, rated Class 6 for gravity and Class 9 for atmospheric hazard. 29 documented emergency hull seals on live decompression events, including one seal performed in 17 minutes on a 2-meter breach, while the pressure differential was pulling him toward it at a rate the safety report described as unsurvivable under standard protocol. One documented incident of dragging 4 unconscious crew members in one trip from a collapsing airlock during a coolant fire. One documented plasma burn scar to the left forearm from that same fire, treated in the field by the subject on himself with a thermal patch of civilian-grade adhesive, because the medic was already dead. 2 commendations for meritorious service. 1 demotion for punching a supervisor who had ordered a subordinate to enter a compromised zone without a spare bottle. 1 reinstatement 6 weeks later because the subordinate would have died and everyone, including the supervisor, knew it. The warden read the file again. She read the medical annex. She read the section on musculoskeletal density that noted in the dry tone of a colonial physician marking down a routine measurement that Louis A. Ferris carried a bone mineral density in the 97th percentile of humans surveyed in the outer system, a skeletal muscle mass in the 98th, and a pain tolerance recorded in 1 documented emergency dental extraction performed without anesthetic on a supply block platform at a level the attending flagged as clinically extreme. The warden looked at her tactical display. 21 of her borders were now flat. She cycled her ridge plates, a color her court had never seen on her before, a sick, pale green that translated in her language to a phrase for the specific fear of having priced a job incorrectly. She said aloud to the empty bridge, "This is not correct. This cannot be correct. Pull the file again." The subordinate pulled the file again. The file was the same. The warden set the file down. She said, in the tone of a merchant discovering that the crate she has just unloaded contains something for which she has no license to trade, "This is not a maintenance drone." She rose from her seat and, for the first time in the operation, walked toward the flagship's own boarding shuttle. In the corridors of Aurelius 9, Lou Ferris was doing something that would look, from a distance, like methodical hull maintenance, and up close, like a slaughter. He had been trained to move through the interior of a working ship without being seen, because a hull maintenance tech who is seen is a hull maintenance tech who is in the way. He knew the maintenance crawlways because he had installed them. He knew the sightlines because he had spent his adult life looking at ships from the angle their designers had never considered. He knew, with the boredom of a professional, that the Thesavoy's 6th limb shield actuator sheared at the joint seam on a right turn because he had read it in a report while eating a bad breakfast on a long transit 3 years earlier. And he had at the time filed the fact away with the same absence of drama with which he had filed the boiling point of coolant on the port loop. He put 3 troopers down in the second hold with the axe and 1 plasma sidearm he had recharged from a wall port. He put 4 more down in the corridor to the aft engine bay with a length of pipe he had unbolted from a support strut because the axe head was going dull and he wanted to save it. He put 2 down in the aft engine bay itself with his bare hands and a coil of copper grounding cable because the aft engine bay had no headroom for the axe, and copper grounding cable at Ganymede gravity was a very effective tool for a man who knew how to use it. He took a plasma burn to the right thigh during the aft engine bay engagement. He limped for the next 3 corridors and did not let it slow him. He took a second burn to the ribs at the entrance to the primary lift core. He did let that one slow him. He limped into a maintenance closet, closed the door behind him, sat down on an overturned crate, opened his suit at the waist, and looked at the wound in his own side. The plasma had gone through the outer suit layer and cauterized part of the flesh, but had left a deep laceration where the beam had glanced off a ridge in his rib and torn a channel through the muscle above it. He was bleeding steadily. It was the kind of wound that would kill him in about 90 minutes if he did not close it. He did not have 90 minutes. He had, by his own count, maybe 40 before the HFY understood that the losses in the ship were localized to a single agent and started venting compartments in the hope of catching him by pressure. He had, by his own count, maybe 70 before Coordinator Praxil escalated to a wider search that would find the void gap where Marisol Cade and Piotr Alazar were still lying, breathing shallow, waiting. Lou reached into his kit and took out a small metal tube that had been in the same pocket for 11 years. It was a civilian-grade thermal patch adhesive of a brand that had gone out of production 6 years ago, and it was the same brand of adhesive that had been on the field-treated burn scar on his left forearm since a coolant fire on Ganymede a very long time ago. He heated the tip of a small maintenance blade with the striker of his suit's emergency igniter until the tip glowed a dull orange. He looked at the wound. He set his teeth against a rag from his kit. He pressed the glowing tip along the edge of the wound where the largest bleeder was, and he cauterized the vessel closed in 3 passes. The sound he made was not a scream. It was a low, flat exhale that did not stop for the full 3 passes. Then he broke open the tube of adhesive, packed the wound with the coarse gel, pressed the edges of the flesh together with 2 fingers, and held them there for 90 seconds while the adhesive cured. He wiped his hands on the rag. He closed his suit at the waist. He stood up. He picked up the axe. He walked out of the maintenance closet and back into the corridor. 2 decks above, in the boarding shuttle that had crossed from the flagship to Aurelius 9, the Warden Veth was walking through the corridors of the cargo hauler with the escort of her personal guard and the specific readiness of a woman who had, for the first time in 20 years of commercial extraction operations, come to a target vessel expecting to see the target in person. She reached the 3rd hold. She stood over the body of Asuran. She looked at the joint seam of the 6th limb actuator, sheared cleanly through in one stroke. She looked at the size of the axe, cut against the axe head resting on the deck a meter away. She reached down and picked the axe up. It was heavy. It was heavier than the ceremonial hand weapons her caste carried on state days. It was made of tungsten and steel and a dense composite of some kind, and it was, she realized, a working tool. It had been designed to cut through hull composite in a vent breach. It had not been designed to cut a HFY champion in half. She set the axe down. She cycled her ridge plates, the pale green of a merchant who has bought a crate mislabeled. She said to Praxil at her elbow, "Where is he now?" Praxil said, "The primary lift core, 2nd deck. He is moving toward the relay bay." The warden said, "The relay bay is under jamming lattice control from the flagship. Even if he reaches it, he cannot break the lattice from that terminal. It is not connected." Praxil said, "Warden, with respect, the maintenance drone appears to have known the ship's schematics better than the ship's designers." The warden looked at Praxil. She said, "He is not a maintenance drone." Praxil said, "What is he, Warden?" The warden said, "I do not know yet. I intend to find out." She turned and began to walk, at a pace her escort was unaccustomed to, toward the primary lift core. On the 2nd deck of Aurelius 9, in a corridor that smelled of scorched ozone and cheap coolant, Lou Ferris met the Warden Veth for the first time. She came around the corner with her escort of 4. He came around the other corner with the axe and the plasma sidearm, and one hand pressed against the adhesive patch under his ribs that was still curing. He saw her ridge plates cycle from pale green to the specific silver of a professional recognizing another professional. He saw the escort raise their weapons. He saw her raise one 3-jointed hand, palm out, in the universal gesture for hold. She said through her translator strip in the flat trade common she had learned as a young officer, "You are the maintenance drone." Lou said, "I'm a hull tech." She said, "Your file says you sealed a 2-meter breach in 17 minutes with your hands on a live decompression event." Lou said, "The report said it was unsurvivable." "It wasn't. I was." She said, "The report also said You performed emergency dental extraction on yourself without anesthetic. Lou said, I had a supply block. I had a bad tooth. I didn't have a doctor. You do what you can with what you've got. She said, you have been informally trained for none of what you are doing now. Lou said, you're wrong about that. I've been informally trained for everything I'm doing now. That's what a Ganymede platform is. That's what 12 years of it is. Every day is informal training. She said, we priced this job on a manifest that listed you as ancillary. Lou said, I know. Sable Vance made sure of it. Sable Vance is going to be your problem in about 40 minutes when the Colonial Authority gets here. Councilman Vale is going to be your problem in about 40 days. I'm going to be your problem for the next 20 minutes. She said, Councilman Vale. Lou said, that's the name on the mandate. She gave it to me. I've got no reason to believe she was lying. The warden was silent for several seconds. Her ridge plates cycled through 3 colors her escort did not have names for. She said finally, Councilman Vale was to arrange a war. Lou said, that's what she said. The warden said, we were paid to silence the outer belt for 1 week to permit a private ordnance delivery. We were not told the delivery was to start a war between the Colonial Authority and the Varan Consortium. Lou said, now you know. The warden said, if it is true, my clan will be the first casualty of that war. The consortium will assume we were the vector. Lou said, that sounds like a problem for your clan. The warden said, it is a problem for my clan. She lowered her 3-jointed hand a fraction. The escort did not lower their weapons. Lou did not lower his. There was, for a moment, a silence in the corridor of Aurelius 9 that was different from all the silences that had come before it, because it was not the silence of ambush or the silence of loss. It was the silence of 2 people who had just realized they were, unwillingly, on the same side of something larger than either of them. The warden said, you cannot break the jamming lattice from this ship. Lou said, I know. I already broke it. I broke it 4 hours ago with a hand crank. The warden looked at him. She said, that is not possible. Our lattice covers every band. Lou reached into his suit pocket and took out the small pitted brass and steel device with the folded crank on the side. He held it up. The warden said, what is that? Lou said, my father used to fish the Bering Sea. That's a piece of ocean on the planet I grew up on. In the winter, the storms would knock the modern radios out. He kept this. It's an analog emergency beacon. It runs on a frequency that no commercial civilization has used for 80 years. Your lattice wasn't calibrated against it. It's been broadcasting my convoy's coordinates for 4 hours and 11 minutes. The warden was silent. Her ridge plates cycled the pale green again. Lou said, the Colonial Authority already knows where you are. They already know Aurelius 9 is compromised. They already know what shape of ship you're flying and how many of you there are. What they don't know yet is that the reason you're here isn't the reason your clan thinks it's here. What they don't know yet is Councilman Vale. The warden said, you are going to tell them. Lou said, you are going to tell them. I'm just going to keep you alive long enough to do it. The warden looked at him a long moment. She lowered her hand fully. She said quietly, escort, stand down. The escort did not stand down. The warden said, in a tone that was no longer the pale silver of professional curiosity, but the deep umber of an order that would be obeyed, stand down. The escort stood down. Lou lowered the axe a fraction. He did not lower it fully. He said, where's the relay bay control on your flagship? The warden said, second deck aft, behind a 15-centimeter armor bulkhead, guarded by 6 of my personal guard, my chief archivist, and the harmonics corps itself. Lou said, take me there. The warden said, you will not survive that room. Lou said, I will survive that room long enough, which was when the transmission came through on the warden's own translator strip. that the Varan Consortium's forward picket fleet had, in the last 4 minutes, arrived at the edge of the outer belt in strength, having intercepted the Bering Sea beacon signal and interpreted the compromise of the colonial authorities' distress grid as a HFY act of war. The warden closed her 3 eyes for exactly 1 second. This was, in her species, the equivalent of a very deep, very tired breath. She opened her eyes. She said, "The war is starting." Lou said, "Then we've got less time than I thought." The warden said, "The war has already started. This is no longer about your convoy. This is now about whether my clan is exterminated in the next 6 hours or the next 6 years." Lou said, "And whether Councilman Vale drinks a glass of wine tonight or hangs from a rope. Same question, different clock." The warden said, "Get on my shuttle. I will take you to the relay bay." Lou looked at her. He said, "The last time I got on a HFY shuttle offer, 31 of my people died." The warden said, "The last time you got on a HFY shuttle offer, I did not know what you were. Now I do." Lou looked at the escort. He looked at the warden. He looked at the axe in his hand. He said, "Cade and Alazar are in the void gap between the 3rd and 4th hold. Send 2 of your guard to seal that gap from the outside so nobody else finds them. If they come out of that gap dead, you and I are going to have a different conversation." The warden said, "It will be done." She gave the order. 2 of the escort peeled off. Lou watched them go with a face that did not change. Then he got on the shuttle. The flight from Aurelius 9 to the flagship took 2 minutes. In those 2 minutes, Lou sat on a HFY bench that was not designed for the human hip and looked at the warden Veth, and the warden Veth looked at him. She said, "Why did you not go to your captain when you learned Sable Vance had sold the route?" He said, "Because if I had gone to the captain, Sable would have known I knew within the hour, and she would have moved on me before I could hide anyone. I couldn't save the whole crew. I had to pick. So I picked 3. Cade, because she trusted me. Alazar, because he's 22 years old, and his mother's a widow. And the 3rd one I had to leave in the void gap alone because he was on shift when I made my rounds, and I couldn't get to him without being seen. His name is Rafi Okafor. He's in an oxygen bottle locker on deck 4. If you find him, you keep him alive." The warden said, "There are 3, not 2, in your convoy still living." He said, "Yes." The warden said, "You did not tell me about the 3rd one when the escort left." He said, "I didn't tell you about the 3rd one when the escort left because I didn't know if I could trust the escort. I know I can trust you. Send someone." The warden said, "You have known me for 4 minutes." He said, "I've known you long enough to know what your ridge plates do when you're afraid. You've been the color of a merchant with a bad crate for 6 of the last 10 minutes. You want out of this alive. Getting Rafi Okafor out alive is the smallest thing I'm going to ask of you before this is over. Do it." The warden gave the order. A 3rd guard peeled off from the flagship's arrival bay. Lou did not thank her. They walked through the corridors of the flagship at a pace the warden's court had never seen her walk. She dismissed courtiers with a wave of one 3-jointed hand. She dismissed the flagship's chief accountant with a low, percussive click that made the accountant flatten his ridge plates against the wall and hurry the other way. She stopped once at an intersection where 3 corridors met and looked at Lou. She said, "The relay bay's harmonics core, when destroyed, will release 6 years of suppressed signals into the grid in a single burst." He said, "Then destroy it." She said, "Do you understand what 6 years of suppressed signals means?" He said, 1,200 voices. She said, 1,200 voices, 1,200 families, 1,200 civilian and commercial vessels the lattice has silenced since it was raised. Not all colonial authority, some Varan, some independent, some my own clan's rivals. It will be when the harmonics core goes, the largest single release of suppressed communication in the recorded history of my species' operations. It will exonerate my clan of 18 separate accusations we have been unable to answer, because the answers were locked behind the lattice. He said, "Good." She said, "It will also destroy the flagship. There is no configuration in which the harmonics core detonates and this vessel survives." He said, "How many of your people on this vessel are in the war conspiracy?" She said, "None below the rank of warden." He said, "Then evacuate everyone below the rank of warden right now onto every shuttle you have. Send them to the consortium picket. Wave a white flag. The consortium wants your clan exterminated, but they'll take prisoners over corpses. Buy time." She said, "That will look to my rivals in the clan like surrender." He said, "It will look to the 1,200 voices your lattice has been suppressing like justice. That's a longer play." The warden looked at him. Her ridge plates cycled a color that in her language was a phrase for the specific decision to accept a permanent scar in exchange for a temporary breath. She said, "Praxil, order the evacuation." Praxil said, "Warden, that is not procedure." The warden said, "That is the order. Execute it." Praxil executed it. The flagship began, in the next 4 minutes, to hollow itself. Ridge-plated soldiers and clerks and cooks and clan archivists filed onto shuttle after shuttle in a silence that carried its own kind of dignity, because none of them had ever seen the warden give an order like this one, and none of them, therefore, were going to embarrass her by asking why. They filed onto the shuttles. They flew, one by one, toward the Varan Consortium picket line, transponders open, weapons cold, ridge plates cycling the pale grey that meant surrender. Lou watched them go from a viewport in the corridor outside the relay bay. He said, without looking at the warden, "Your people don't ask a lot of questions." The warden said, "My people have been asking one question quietly for 20 years. This is the first order that suggests they might not have to." Lou said, "What question?" The warden said, "Whether the empire we serve has been a merchant house or a slaughterhouse. Different castes have different answers. Today, my caste receives an answer we did not want." Lou did not respond. The warden said, "You will need this." She handed him the small tool he had taken from Osseran's belt, the one whose function he had not known. He looked at it. She said, "It is a harmonics key. It will admit you to the core chamber. Without it, you will not pass the second bulkhead. The chief archivist will not surrender the core. The archivist believes in the empire. You will have to go through him." Lou looked at the key. He said, "How do I destroy the core?" The warden said, "There is a manual vent lever on the north wall of the chamber. It was installed as a safety measure by an engineer who did not believe an emperor could be trusted with a doomsday weapon. It has never been thrown. Throw it. The core will detonate in 90 seconds. You have those 90 seconds to be somewhere else." Lou said, "There's nowhere else on this ship for me to be." The warden said, "There is one place." She pointed, with her 3-jointed hand, at a small maintenance conduit set into the ceiling near the relay bay door. It was, he noted, with the professional appreciation of a hull tech, a coolant riser that connected directly to the flagship's outer skin. She said, "The conduit vents through a maintenance port on the ventral hull. From the maintenance port there is a service ladder to a lifeboat cradle. The lifeboat cradle has one working boat. It was reserved for me. I will not need it. You will." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because when the war between my clan and the consortium ends, they will need someone from the clan of the warden to sign the peace. If I am dead when they ask, my caste will be blamed and the killing will continue. I intend to be alive when they ask. I do not intend to be on this flagship when it stops existing." He said, "How are you getting off?" She said, "There is a second lifeboat. It is in a compartment my archivist does not know about. You did not know I was corrupt, drone. You only knew I was a warden." Lou said, "You're not corrupt. You're just old. That's a different problem." The warden cycled her ridge plates the very faint mauve of a species smile. She said, "Go." Lou went. The archivist in the core chamber was 2.5 meters tall, ridge-plated in deep imperial red, and armed with a ceremonial curved blade that would have been at home in a museum on Earth. He was 78 years old in Thesavoy years and had served the Harmonics Corps through 3 succession wars. He believed, with the particular ferocity of an old servant, that the lattice was the Empire, and the Empire was the lattice, and that anyone who came for the core was coming for the throne itself. Lou came into the chamber with the axe. He came in fast. He came in low. The archivist met him at the door. The curved blade sang. Lou took a cut across the meat of his left shoulder that opened him from collarbone to bicep. He kept moving. The archivist swung again. Lou ducked under the swing, drove the axe up into the seam under the archivist's 6th limb actuator, and sheared the actuator clean off. The archivist did not fall. The archivist swung a 3rd time with a limb he no longer had a shield on. The blade opened Lou's cheek from ear to jaw. Lou spat blood onto the deck plating. He said in a voice that was starting to slur from the pain in his cheek and the burn under his ribs and the plasma wound in his thigh, "Old man, I don't want to kill you. I'm going to. But I don't want to." The archivist said, in a voice the translator strip rendered with sad dignity, "Then you and I are the same. I do not want to die. I am going to." They fought for 11 seconds. It was the longest 11 seconds of Lou Ferris's life. At the end of it, the archivist was on his knees, with the axe in the base of his skull, and Lou was on one knee with the archivist's curved blade lying at his feet, and a wound in his left side that was going to kill him in about 40 minutes if he did not get to the lifeboat. He got up. He walked to the north wall. He threw the lever. A red glyph, in a language he could not read, lit above the core in a pulse that translated universally as 90 seconds to detonation. Lou did not run to the ceiling conduit. He walked. He walked because he was bleeding too much to run. He climbed the maintenance conduit with the strength of his shoulders, dragging his left arm and his wounded thigh behind him. He climbed for what felt like an hour and was, in fact, 38 seconds. He rolled out of the conduit into a service space he could barely fit through. He crawled to the ladder. He climbed the ladder. His hands were slick with blood. He fell twice. He kept climbing. He fell into the lifeboat cradle at 49 seconds. He hit the launch stud with the flat of his palm. The cradle released. The lifeboat kicked away from the flagship at a rate that pressed him against the pilot chair and blacked him out for 2 seconds. When his vision came back, he was watching, through the boat's aft port, the Thesavoy flagship come apart in a column of light 3 kilometers long that bent the vacuum around it into shapes his father would not have believed. 6 years of suppressed signals hit the outer belt relay grid in 4 seconds. 1,200 voices. A civilian freighter captain named Marla Ozan, missing for 4 years, whose family had been told she had gone dark in transit and had held a funeral without a body. Her signal came in with her voice, calm and tired, saying she was still alive on a rock past the belt with her whole crew, and could someone please come get them. A consortium science ship whose distress had been swallowed 19 months ago now sent a burst that included a manifest and a survivor count and a plea for their families to know they were coming home. A colonial authority freighter, gone dark 7 months ago, sent a signal that included the last words of a first officer named Anissa Ray, who had died of a bad wound, but whose message she had recorded and set to loop had said only, "Tell my daughter I saw the belt one last time and it was beautiful." The consortium picket line, receiving the release, understood in the same 4 seconds that the Thesavoy had not been the sole vector of the lattice, understood that the lattice had suppressed consortium signals too, understood that the story they had been about to open a war over was more complicated than they had been told. The consortium picket line, in the 10th second after the release, sent a single message to what remained of the Thesavoy flagship's evacuation shuttles. The message was, "Stand down, we will hear you." The war did not start that day, it ended that week. not because the Empire was defeated in a battle, because the 1,200 voices once released would not go quiet again, and the accountants of every polity involved understood over the course of that week that the ledger of who had wronged whom was longer and more shared than any of them had been permitted to know. The HFY commercial extraction arm collapsed, not under gunfire, but under the weight of 18 simultaneous civil suits filed in 6 jurisdictions the Warden's clan had never before been reachable in. The Colonial Shipping Authority, receiving Sable Vance's sworn testimony under a plea agreement Lou Ferris had personally negotiated with a fleet coordinator he had never met, dismantled its oversight board within 11 days. Councilman Renard Vale was found in his office one evening at the end of the week, with a service pistol in his hand and a note on his desk that read simply, "The ledger is closed." The lifeboat that Lou Ferris rowed away from the flagship was picked up 16 hours later by a Colonial Authority frigate whose captain, a woman named Inez Vogel, had received a single hand-crank analog beacon signal on a channel she had not monitored in her career and had, on instinct, ordered her ship to run at full burn for its origin. Marisol Cade and Piotr Alazar were pulled out of the void gap of Aurelius 9 by a Thesavoy guard who had been told, by a warden he did not know how to disobey, that they were to be delivered breathing. They were delivered breathing. Rafi Okafor was pulled out of the oxygen bottle locker on deck 4 by the same guard, dehydrated and pale, and given a canister of water that the guard did not know how to open. Rafi Okafor opened it himself. The Warden Veth was picked up in her second lifeboat by a consortium cutter whose commander had, 20 years earlier, served under an officer she had once faced across a negotiating table. He offered her tea. She accepted. They talked about ledgers. 6 weeks later, Lou Ferris was sitting in a small officer's lounge on a Colonial Authority orbital station, wearing a clean shirt and drinking a very bad cup of coffee, when a colonial admiral named Osric Duval walked in and offered him a commission, a medal and a ceremony on Earth. Lou looked at the coffee. He looked at the admiral. He looked at the coffee again. He said, "I appreciate the offer, sir." The admiral said, "The Colonial Authority owes you a debt that cannot be repaid. We would like to try." Lou said, "I appreciate that too. I don't want a commission. I don't want a medal. I don't want a ceremony." The admiral said, "May I ask what you do want?" Lou said, "I want my back pay. I've got about 7 months owed on the Aurelius contract. I want that. I want a shower with real water pressure. The last 3 showers I've had have all been low flow because somebody in procurement bought a cheap manifold. I want somebody to call my sister Iris on Ganymede and tell her I'm going to be late. Her scrubber's broken and I owe her a transfer. If the authority wants to owe me a debt, the debt can be that scrubber. She lives at Habitat 349, West Quadrant. Tell her Lou said the coffee up here is worse than the coffee she used to make when we were kids, and that's a low bar. She'll laugh. She's had a long year." The Admiral said, "Mr. Ferris, that is all you want?" Lou said, "Sir, that's all I want. It's all I." The Admiral said, "There will be, at some point, a request from the Varan Consortium for you to speak at their council. There will be a request from the Warden Veth's cast for you to attend a signing. There will be a request from the families of the 1,200 voices. There will be more requests than you can imagine. I cannot shield you from all of them." Lou said, "Sir, I know." The Admiral said, "And," Lou said, "and I'll go to the signings. I'll shake the hands. I'll say what needs to be said. I'll do it because 31 people I ate breakfast with didn't come home, and because if I don't stand for them, nobody will. But, sir, I want you to understand something." The Admiral said, "Yes." Lou said, "I'm not a soldier. I'm not a hero. I'm not any of the things they're going to say I am on the news feeds. I'm a hull tech from a mining moon whose father taught him to make noise with a very small tool. I got angry. I had an axe. I had a good pipe. I had a rider log I read because nobody else would, and I had a sister who needed a scrubber. That's the whole story. When you tell it that way. You don't dress it up. You don't put a uniform on it. You tell it like a report. Because if you tell it any other way, the next hull tech who's supposed to read a rider log is going to think he needs a uniform to do it. And he doesn't. He just needs to read the log. The Admiral was silent for several seconds. Then he inclined his head, which was the closest thing to a bow a colonial admiral was permitted to give a civilian. He said, "Mr. Ferris, I will tell it your way." Lou said, "Thank you, sir." He drank the rest of the coffee. He grimaced. He said, "And sir, one more thing. There's going to be a ceremony, isn't there, on Earth? With crowds, with a stage, with cameras." The Admiral said, "Yes." Lou said, "I'll come. I'll stand on the stage. I'll say a few words for the 31 and the 1200 and the 3 that made it. But you tell the ceremony planners something for me." The Admiral said, "What?" Lou said, "Tell them I don't wash windows. Whatever the ceremony is, whatever they want me to do, I don't wash windows. That's my line. Anything above the line I'll consider. Anything below it, they can find another guy." The Admiral did not laugh. Colonial admirals do not laugh, but his mouth did something at the corners that his aides would later describe as the closest thing to a smile they had seen on him in 11 years. He said, "Mr. Ferris, nobody's going to ask you to wash windows." Lou said, "Good. Then we've got an understanding." He set the empty cup down. He looked out the viewport of the officers' lounge at the slow turning of the orbital station, and, beyond it, at the black of the outer belt, where 3 ships were still recovering bodies from the wreck of Aurelius 9. He thought for a moment of Delia Manning with her coffee cup. He thought of the junior stevedore who had been going to call her mother. He thought of Ian Treleaven, who had died reaching for an override that Sable Vance had cut. He thought of Sable Vance in her cell awaiting her trial and did not know what he felt about her, and decided he did not have to know yet. He thought of the warden Veth, who had written to him twice from her caste's temporary court on a consortium station, and who had ended her second letter with the phrase her translator strip had rendered as, "You were not a maintenance drone. You are a category we did not have. We will have to invent one." He had written back, "Don't. Categories are how you get in trouble in the first place." He thought of his sister Iris, whose scrubber, according to the Colonial Authority engineer he had spoken with 2 days earlier, was already being replaced with a new generation unit rated for twice the throughput at no cost to her. He thought of his father, who had died 4 years ago on a boat that smelled of diesel and fish blood, and who had said, in the last conversation they had, that a man who wanted to be found had to be willing to make noise for a very long time with a very small tool. Lou Ferris, hull maintenance tech, 41 years old, wide through the shoulders, sat in the officers' lounge of a Colonial Authority orbital station and let himself, for the first time in 6 weeks, be tired. The Admiral had gone. The coffee was cold. The station turned. Somewhere out beyond the viewport, in a small brass and steel housing pitted from Bering Sea saltwater, a folded hand crank waited in the pocket of a patched EVA suit for the next time a man needed to shout with something small. What a journey! The real strength of humanity was never the muscle, never the axe, never the tungsten edge. The real weapon was one stubborn tech who read the log everybody else skipped, and one small brass beacon a father gave a son so he would never be truly out of reach. If this story moved you, if you felt the ridge plate cycle and the axe come down, leave your like right here, because that is what keeps stories like these alive on this channel. Share it with someone who loves sci-fi about the underestimated human standing against the impossible, and hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next HFY epic we drop. Now tell us in the comments, and be honest, would you have taken the Colonial Commission and the Medal on Earth, or would you have walked away with the back pay and gone home to fix your sister's scrubber? Only one answer. Pick your side. Keep your eyes on the black out there. and keep listening for the small tools that still know how to shout.